Hey, thanks for checking out our messages online. And let me encourage you to also go to our website, check out how we can further be of ministry to you. Send us a note, check one of the links. We'd love to follow up with you and connect with you. Again, our prayer is that you'll be blessed by the teaching of God's Word. You got your groove on this morning? Hey, awesome. Hey, great to see y'all, and nice to welcome to fall. Actually, no. It's good to feel this kind of weather this time in Texas. Amen? All right. Hey, if you hadn't been with us the last month or so, we're in a series on the book of Philippians. And so if you brought a printed copy of God's Word or however you access Scripture, I'm going to encourage you to turn to Philippians chapter 1 this morning as we kind of jump into the passage we're going to look at today, which will actually come from Philippians chapter 2. Let me give you a little background. We all have ambitions and goals in life, don't we? I mean, we all have things we want to achieve, we want to accomplish, and some of us are very much goal-driven, right? Well, the Apostle Paul had goals. He had clear ambition, and he shared those, and we have copies of some of those in the New Testament. And one of his clearest ambitions was to go and preach the gospel in Rome. Kind of have a feeling that his idea for that was to go and perhaps preach in the Forum or maybe the Colosseum. Matter of fact, we read in Romans chapter 1, verse 15, that he was eager to do that. He says, notice Romans 1:15, he says, that's why I'm so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. He's like, that's my goal. I want to make it to Rome. I want to preach the gospel in Rome. Well, if you've been with us, he made it to Rome, but he did not make it to Rome as a preacher, which had been his goal. Instead, he made it to Rome as a prisoner, okay? Big difference between preacher and prisoner, right? The backstory, he was falsely accused in Jerusalem of sedition and was arrested and was beaten. As a matter of fact, was then transferred to Caesarea Philippi, where he was held in prison for 2 years. 2 years waiting his day in court. Following that court appearance, he appealed to Rome. And so he began a journey to Rome where he was shipwrecked in the way off Cyprus. And then he eventually makes it to Rome where he is held under house arrest. Picture this, 24 hours a day chained to a Roman guard. So his goal, make it to Rome. He made it to Rome. His goal, preach the gospel in Rome. He's chained to a series of prisoners who watch him 24/7, a new prisoner every 6 hours. That's the context of the book of Philippians. And yet what we see in the book of Philippians is 16 times in 104 verses, we see Paul referencing his experience of joy and challenging us to rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. And so with that in mind, today we're going to address really how was Paul able to maintain an attitude and a mindset, not of a victim, not of one who complained about his circumstances, but of one who honored God in the circumstances. Because here's the reality, if Paul had not reacted the way that he did in the circumstances he was in, you would not have what you hold in your hand today, which is the book of Philippians, okay? A matter of fact, one of my favorite pictures I like to think of Paul is this picture from the cover, Ambassador in Chains. And Paul did preach in Rome. He preached in Rome one at a time to one Roman soldier for 6 hours at a time. And he did that, I believe, 24/7 because the gospel began to spread throughout the military leaders of Rome and actually included some of those of the royal household. So with that in mind, today we're going to address really two things, and let me just kind of warn you at the outset. Today I'm going to be stepping on my own toes. I may step on yours as well, okay? Because a lot of people will say, how do you come up with stuff to preach? Well, obviously it's this content, but I begin with myself, okay? So today I want to address a mindset and a habit. It is a mindset of entitlement, and it is a habit of complaint. And we're going to see that in Scripture. If you have your Bibles, for context, let's start Philippians chapter 1, verse 27. Paul says, whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel. We talked about this last week. Whatever happens to me, but also whatever happens to you. He's saying you are to live in a manner worthy of the gospel. Your life should be different. There should be a quality of grace in your life that reflects the gospel, what God has done for us in Jesus, the gospel of Christ. He says, then whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, talking about the unity of the church, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel. Skip on to verse 29, if you would. Notice he says, for it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him. Evidently, what was happening to some in the church in Philippi is they were being persecuted for their faith. There were some challenges that came because of their faith in Christ. Certainly, Paul knew that well because he had experienced. He was in prison writing these words. And he's saying that not only has God called us to believe in him, but sometimes as we believe and are obedient in following him, we will experience challenges, even persecution as a result of our following him. Now he continues, let's pick it up in chapter 2, verse 3, just for the sake of time this morning. Last week we saw that he says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather in humility, value others above yourself. Now that we looked at last week is such a challenge. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, okay? He's going to build on that today. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest. And we saw that's our default, is it not? But each of you to the interest of others. And notice how he continues. In your relationships with each other, the way we're to treat each other, have the same, and then notice that word mindset. You might want to circle it. Have the same mindset of Christ Jesus. And then what you're going to see if you have a printed Bible is oftentimes verses 6 and 11 are indented. It may be indented in your Bible. You can look at it if you have a printed copy. The reason for that is we believe these words were actually part of an early hymn in the church. And so Paul is addressing this mindset, and what he does is he then shifts their focus to the example of Christ. So notice what he says, verse 6. Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage, okay? Rather, he made himself nothing. In other words, he emptied himself, not of his divine nature, not of his divinity, but he reduced, in a sense, himself by becoming human. He experienced what you and I experience, the limitations of a human experience. Notice what it says. And he says he didn't use it to his advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, okay? Verse 8, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. In other words, not only did Jesus do that, but he came for the purpose of providing a way for you and I to be forgiven and set right with God. In order for him to do that, he came to serve us, to save us, and in order to do that, he had to take on not only humanity, but bear our sin on the cross. So notice what he says, verse 9. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place. I love that. and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. What is Paul doing? Paul is saying, he's going to address an attitude, and he's going to say your mindset, your outlook should reflect that of Jesus Christ. And what he's going to say is Jesus had every right as God to rule and to reign and to serve himself, yet Jesus came in humility, born in a stable, lived a life of simplicity and a life of service, bearing our sin and shame on a cross, our pain, our injustice, so that we could be set right with God. Jesus came to seek and to save that which was lost. He came as a servant, okay? So here's what Paul is saying. All right, let's talk about how that should impact your outlook on life, okay? If you understand what God has done for you in Christ, and we have a picture of who Jesus is and what he did in emptying himself for us, then let's talk about how we should live life. So let's talk first about this mindset. Today I want to address what is prevalent in our culture, and that is a mindset of entitlement. A mindset that says, I deserve, a mindset that is self-focused, a mindset that is all about me. And in our sinful nature, that, I'm afraid, is our default. So what do I mean about a mindset or an attitude of entitlement? Let me define it, okay? According to Webster's, entitlement is the belief or the attitude that one is inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. Now, it is true that we are uniquely made in the image of God. We reflect him, and no two of us are alike. But there is in this culture that which wants to be very self-focused, and that which wants to say we inherently are special. We deserve. Yet the reality is we deserve the judgment of God. The reality is if you want to know what you deserve, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There is no one righteous, no, not one. I know that doesn't sell well in our culture, but that's true. Jesus came because we deserve what he took for us. You understand the gospel, the heart of the gospel says something about the human nature, about our need, which is the fact that we are fallen, we're sinful. We need God's redemption. Now let's talk about entitlement for a moment. Entitlement is easier to see in kids. Will you agree? I mean, and it's kind of inherent in kids, right? We're born, the very first word we learn is me, mine. You know, I mean, we're that way. Here's some signs of a child entitlement complex. They expect bribes or treats for doing the thing that they should normally do. Any of you bribe your kids? If you do this, then I think we all have. A child feels rules don't apply to him or her, right? I'm special, that doesn't apply to me. A child doesn't naturally care to help others, do they? No. Can't handle disappointment. Acts out in public if they don't get what he or she wants. Any of you had a kid meltdown in Kroger because they wanted whatever? But yeah. Child entitlement says blame others when things go wrong. Expects others to fix their mistakes. Always wants more, right? We know what it looks like to see an entitled child, right? What does entitlement look like in the mirror? We're going to talk about that. Well, let's play it safe for a little bit longer. Let's talk about kids, okay? Let's don't get to us. Let's talk about kids. That's funner. Matter of fact, Calvin and Hobbes are some of my favorite cartoons, and a lot of times you kind of see yourself in that. Here's an old Calvin and Hobbes. He's saying on the left, everything is so hard. I just wish I could take a pill and be perfect. I just wish I could push a button and have anything I want. That's childish, right? And then Hobbes says, well, the American dream lives on. And then notice what he says to the right. This is the part I love. Why should I have to work for everything? It's like saying I don't deserve it, right? Now we look at that and we laugh and We hear it from our kids, I don't deserve that. Why did he get that and I got that? It's not fair. Anybody hear a kid? It's not fair. How can I have the latest iPhone? My friend had the latest iPhone. Why can't I have the new generation? I have to have an iPhone 6. It's not fair. I said I was going to step on some toes this morning. I mean, you do realize that that's our culture, this selfishness, this comparison, this, I deserve this. And here's what Scripture says. You don't deserve the grace of God. You don't. Thank God we don't get what we deserve. John Townsend talks about this as an attitudinal disease, which is prevalent in our culture. He wrote an excellent book called The Entitlement Cure, and it's especially helpful for parents. But in that, he talks about two characteristics or components of entitlement. He says the two main components are this: I'm owed special treatment, right? Well, of course. I mean, I'm gifted. I'm special, right? Second thing is I'm exempt from responsibility. I'm not responsible for how my actions or words affect you, okay? That's your problem. That's your problem, not my problem. I'm special, right? Do you see how that is reinforced? Do you see how that is reinforced in advertising in our culture? I mean, from ancient ads like, you deserve a break today. Oh, really? Right? I mean, do you see how that messaging is constantly bombarding each of us in our culture? And so I want to begin by just going through some of the symptoms or signs that you might have an entitlement mindset. Okay, anybody ready for this? Sorry, I don't want to hear this, right? Because if it's a test, I'm afraid I may not do well on the test. All right, so there are 10 things. So just for grins, bear with me. 10 signs that you might have an entitlement mindset. Number 1, the belief that one deserves happiness, combined with the drive to ensure that that happens even at the expense of others. Second thing, the tendency to look out for oneself and one's needs and desires more than anyone else most of the time. That's the key, most of the time. Number 3, imposing unrealistic demands or expectations on family, children's friends, employees, or employers that do not apply to self. Number 4, punishing people when they don't do what you want or expect them to do, either passively through silent treatment or aggressively, verbally, expressing. Number 5, having a double standard in the way one behaves or interacts with other people versus the expectations of others. In other words, I can be late and forget my duties and commitments, but you better not be late. I can treat myself, but you can't, right? How about this one? Number 6, tendency to take more than you give in a friendship or a relationship. Number 7, tendency to feel sorry for oneself if things don't work out the way one wants. Number 8, having a hard time compromising or doing what someone else wants to do. I remember a friend of mine from college. He dated a girl that even in college I was like, I think it's all about her. And I tried to warn him, and he ended up getting married. 20 years later, they got a divorce. And I remember asking him about that, and I was like, what happened? And he said, here was the tipping point for me. He said, we went to counseling. I finally got her to go to counseling, and we were sitting in the counselor's office, and the counselor asked this one question. He said, have you ever done anything simply because your husband wanted to do that? And she said, no, I can't think of that. No. And he said, I just realized I married a narcissist. All right, let's continue. All right, number 9, craving admiration and attention. And finally, number 10, asserting one's dominance or superiority over other people and finding it second nature. Here's the thing about entitlement. Not only is that what the messaging of our culture tells us we deserve, But oftentimes we look at that which we also have combined effort for. So we assume, okay, we worked hard to get where we are here, therefore I deserve X, right? It's mentally, there is that part of the equation we understand as adults that everything doesn't come to us, yet at the same time, we put an emphasis on our contribution rather than the opportunities God has given us, right? And yes, while it's true that we work hard oftentimes for the things that we accomplish, we forget that we had no choice in the country we were born in or some of the opportunities we've been given. And rather than move into life with a sense of gratitude, a gratitude that is often combined with effort, what slips in instead is this sense of I'm owed or I deserve. It even happens to pastors. Oh, yeah. You see, I said it's hard to see entitlement in the mirror. A number of years ago, I was pastoring a church and had gone through a really difficult time with transition in the church then. We had some staff leave. We had some moral failures. I mean, there were some terrible things that were not my fault, not my doing, but I had to handle. And it took an emotional toll on me. And I remember, coming out of that, and I was beat down, and I felt discouraged. And so I thought, what I need to do is go see a counselor. By the way, that's a very good thing to do, go see a Christian counselor, to get some perspective. Very healthy thing to do. And I remember going to see with him, and I think, and I was looking forward to it. This is going to help because he's going to lift my spirits. He did not. And he said, well, Chuck, tell me what's going on. I began to tell him, I said, and this, and I'm getting this criticism, and I had to deal with this, and I had to do with this, and I had to do with this. And I'm just like, I'm pouring it out, right? And he said, Chuck, I kind of have an idea what your issue is. And I'm like, oh, really? He said, yeah. And I'm leaning forward. Okay, what is it? And he said, I think you're entitled. What? I'm a pastor. What do you mean I'm entitled? I knew exactly what he meant. He said, you assumed because and I'll give you credit, you're serving the Lord out of good intent. You've been responsible, yet you're getting criticized or these difficulties are coming, and they're not your fault, right? Yeah. But you assumed that somehow God owed you and that you would avoid all those difficulties as long as you served him with right intent. In other words, your expectations, both of God and of the church and of what it means to be a pastor, is one of entitlement, not reality. He said, how was Jesus treated? Let's start there. What did Jesus deserve? Well, we just read. Jesus, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or held onto or leveraged for his own, but he emptied himself. How did he empty himself? He was accused. He was beaten. He was trod upon. His beard was plucked out. He was crucified. And you expect, if you're following Jesus, to somehow get off scot-free? That sounds like entitlement. And I'm paying you for this, right? I realized he was right. He was right. My issue was I felt God owed me. I felt as long as I'm doing this, then God owes me that. And here's the thing, I'm not the only one. You see, there's a whole religious brand of this. Folks who come and think, well, if long I go here and if I honor God with my money and I show up and I do this, then I deserve an easy, pleasant, good life. Tell that to Paul. Tell that to Jeremiah. Tell that to Jesus. Entitlement. Entitlement. Now, here's what I've learned about entitlement. An entitlement mindset tends to be self-reinforcing. I read some research from Case Western Reserve University. There's a guy named there by the name of Dr. Joshua Grubbs. This jumped out to me. He said, entitlement tends to be a self-reinforcing, you reacting to perceived injustices. Entitled people direct their anger outward. That's the key. Blaming others while reassuring themselves of their own specialness, thus beginning the cycle again. That is so true. And we live in what we could call the age of entitlement, right? I saw a cartoon that made me laugh this week. And it compares the age of enlightenment with the age of entitlement. And they may have lost it, but if we find it in the back, we will put it up there because it's awesome, okay? So how do we avoid this idea or this mindset of saying, you know, if life does not go the way I anticipate or think that I deserve for it to be, how do I handle with that disappointment, and how does my perspective, one of gratitude and not entitlement? And what we see in Paul is Paul begins his letter, I don't want to take the time to go through it, but he begins his letter by saying, thank you for your concern for me. Paul chooses in these circumstances instead to be grateful. Oh, there's the cartoon. On the left, it says, the world revolves around the sun. That was the age of enlightenment, right? The Copernicus we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Look at the right, the age of entitlement. The world revolves around me. That's where we live today. And I know as parents, you don't want to pass that down to your kids, do you? You don't want to send them out as in little entitled beings into the world. But so oftentimes we do. We don't first check entitlement in the mirror. Matter of fact, 8 ways to avoid producing entitled kids. You want to know what they are? Number 1, and limit their access to pleasure. Let them know that there are limits to life. Have boundaries in life. Don't let them just access their phone or internet whenever they want. Set limits. Number 2, don't cover for them or coddle them. Allow them to take responsibility for their actions. Number 3, make them honest about their shortcomings. In other words, make them verbalize what it is that they did incorrectly or wrong. Remember, we used to have to do that with our kids. So tell me exactly what it was. Okay, tell me what you did to your sister. What was wrong about your behavior? Number 4, set allowances strictly. In other words, don't reward that which is not of excellence. Number 5, teach the value of hard work. Number 6, be consistent with rules. Number 7, teach them to be thankful and grateful. Number 8, don't always be their best friend. Now, we could do a whole message on that, but here's what I want us to see. When we talk about entitlement, we can say, okay, I'll do that for my kids. But so oftentimes what we do is we don't look in the mirror and see how entitlement corrupts our souls. And so let's talk about the second thing. First is entitlement. The second, and it feeds entitlement, is something called a habit of complaining. Look at verses 14 and 16. And these are interrelated. 14, he says, do nothing without grumbling or arguing. Some translations say do everything without complaining. That's what the old NIV said, and I prefer that. Do everything without complaining or arguing, because that's what the word literally means in the Greek. So that you may become blameless and pure, children of God, without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly the word of life. What is Paul saying? Paul is saying if you don't go with the current of culture, don't be a complainer like everybody else. Instead, if you live a life of gratitude, you're going to stand out. You're going to stand out in a good way. And that's why he says, do everything without grumbling or complaining or arguing. And you want to ask yourself, Paul, how are you able to do that? And here's how. He focused on the gospel of Jesus Christ. He focused on the example of Jesus. He reminded himself of what Jesus had done for him, and it curbed and changed his outlook and his attitude. I know I use this quote so often, but I love it from Tim Keller. When he talks about the gospel, he defines it in this way. Tim Keller was pastor in New York for a number of years. He says, the gospel is that I'm so flawed that Jesus had to die for me. In other words, I don't deserve it. Yet I'm so loved and valued that Jesus was glad to die for me. Okay, think about that. This leads to both a deep humility and a deep confidence at the same time. He goes on to say, I cannot feel superior to anyone, which is entitlement, and yet I have nothing to prove to anyone. I do not think more of myself nor less of myself. Instead, I think of myself less. That is Philippians chapter 2. So how do we avoid this attitude of complaining, this habit of complaining? Well, let me just conclude by sharing 3 things that he says that are important that we do. He says, in light of the example of Jesus, encourages us to do 3 things. First thing, and by the way, these all follow with the word therefore. The first thing he says is prioritize your relationship with God. If you are going to be shaped not by the culture, but by the truth of God, you must prioritize your relationship with God. Look at verse 12. Notice what he says. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more so in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose. Now, I want you to think about something for just a sec. When he says that we are to work out our salvation, here's what he's saying. He's not saying that we earn our salvation. No. But what he's saying is, if we are going to live different lives, if we are going to shine like the stars in the skies, the analogy that he uses. In other words, if we're going to live a life not of a complaining, entitled person, but instead a grateful, worshiping person, instead we have to work out our salvation, which means we must prioritize our relationship with God. In order to be shaped by the truth of God, we must encounter the Word of God. That word work out literally means to put effort into. And I love what Psalms 1 says about this. The psalmist writes the following in Psalm 1, verse 1. Blessed is the man or the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers. Then look at verse 2. But whose delight is in the law, that would be the written word of God, the law of the Lord. And who meditates, you might circle that word, who meditates on his law, on this truth, day and night. Now, when you think about meditating on something day and night, means you give focused attention to it. What he's saying is, in order for your life to be shaped by the truth of the gospel, you must remind yourself of the truth of the gospel on an ongoing basis. And that's why he says, but meditates on his law day and night. Notice what he says next. Verse 3 is great. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water. A tree means someone who consistently does something, right? Which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They're like the chaff that the wind blows away. I love that description. In other words, they lack the substance of their life. Okay? And I'll just stop there. What is David saying? David is saying, you want to live a blessed life. If you want to live a life that reflects God and honors God, then you must choose to meditate, to focus, to allow the truth of God to shape how you think, to shape how you respond. You must remind yourself of the gospel. You must remind yourself of what God has done for you in Christ. And what that literally means is this. You must choose as a habit to encounter this on an ongoing basis and reflect on it deeply enough to allow it to shape and even judge and adjust your attitudes and your behavior. And here's what I know to be true. If you will do that, God will take that word and begin to to take the edges off of your pride and off of your ego, and God will begin to shape the person that you are from the inside out. He is true to do that, but you must join him and you must commit to allow God's truth to shape how you think, or else you're going to think and behave like everybody else. Second thing that he commands us to do, he says, therefore, work out your salvation. The second thing he says is to avoid complaining. When he says that we are to not do anything with complaining or grumbling, he's challenging us to avoid complaining. And let's just admit that is far easier to say than to do. Anybody? Can we admit that? We live in a world of complaint, and we encourage complaint in each other, do we not? So how do we do that? How do we break the habit of complaining? Gratitude. I know earlier this year I began to look through my prayer journal, and I write out my prayers. Some of you I've shared with you, a discipline I've done for a number of years. Helps me with my ADD. And I would write out my prayers, and I began to read my prayers, and I began to notice how so many of my prayers had the same theme, but I also realized what was lacking in so many of my prayers. And what was lacking in what I was writing was gratitude. Right about that time, my daughter sent me a Christmas present. And the Christmas present she sent me, and again, I'm like, how did she know? The Christmas present she sent me this year, I kid you not, was a gratitude journal. And knowing me, it was like a 6-minute journal, okay? 6 minutes to start your day with gratitude. Not a big ask, right? And so starting first of the year, and the very first thing in the gratitude journal is to think of 3 things that you're grateful for today that you didn't mention yesterday, okay? And I don't do that perfectly. I'm not here to say I do that every single day, but here's what I began to practice. I began to use that as part of my habit. And it began to change my perspective. Anybody feel a little bit of entitlement creeping in? Anybody go, but I don't deserve this? Anybody looking around going, this isn't fair. Why am I going through this? I want to challenge you. Choose gratitude. Choose gratitude. The final thing that Paul says, not only avoid complaining, but he says that we are to engage in sharing the gospel. Notice the way he says this. I love the way he puts this. I believe it's in verse 14. Notice what he says. Do everything without complaining or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God, without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you'll shine among them like stars in the sky. Notice verse 16. Here's what I wanted to highlight. As you hold firmly to the word of life. Here's what I love. He ends this little section with this little word, as you hold firmly to the word of what? The word of life. What is the word of life? The word of life is the gospel. Here's what Paul is saying. Paul is saying is as you put these things into practice and as you hold firmly to the gospel, what that does is that changes your outlook naturally from yourself to those who need the gospel, right? Philemon chapter 1 verse 6 is one of my life verses. I love it in the original NIV from 1984. He says, I pray that you may be active in sharing your faith so that you will have a full understanding of every good thing we have in Christ. Here's what I have found to be true about me. When I am focused on God, who have you put in my life that I can point to you, that I can be a witness to, that I can invite, that I can include, that I can pray for. The degree to which my focus is on that is the degree to which complaint is diminished in my life. Because here's what I know to be true. When I'm complaining, I'm not witnessing. And when I'm witnessing, I'm not complaining. Anybody complaining? Chances are your focus is in the wrong place. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for your word. I thank you for how you address that which we struggle with, deal with on a daily basis. But God, I thank you for the grace of the Lord Jesus, who chose to bear our sin and our shame, so that, God, not only can we receive life from you, but God, you can shape us as we allow you to lead and direct and be Lord of our lives. God, may we not simply be hearers of the word, may we be doers. And that means in our attitude, and that means in our complaint. And I pray that in Jesus' name. And God's people said, amen. Hi, I'm Pastor Chuck Martin, and I want to thank you for watching our service online today. I sincerely hope it was a blessing to you in your relationship with the Lord. And if you made a decision today regarding your relationship with Christ, we'd love to know that. We'd also love to help you with any questions you have or next steps, how to deepen your relationship with Christ. Please text us with a number that's on the screen so that we can follow up with you. You know, we have a lot going on these days in the life of the church, and there's more detailed information on our website at friscofirst.church. We'd love to also meet you in person, and so I want to encourage you to come in person to check out a service as soon as you're able. Again, thank you for watching today. We look forward to meeting you.